In this week's episode, we speak with Eugenia Kuyda of Replika about creating an AI friend that is always there for you.
If you only share in the moment of crisis, then you actually don't even know how to share anymore.
When you get home and your family asks, like, how was your day? Like, you kind of know they don't really care.
It's the grossest use of played around with an app I've ever heard.
And as always, we respond to your listener questions.
Like, I don't get eat your own dog food.
Happy New Year! Welcome to All Turtles Podcast episode number 9. My name is Blaise Zerega. I'm the editorial guy.
I'm Jessica Collier, one of the co-founders.
And I'm Phil Libin, the CEO guy. And just to show how disciplined we are, we're not actually recording this episode on January 3rd, but it's supposed to come out on January 3rd, which if it does, I'm here to say, is actually my birthday. So it will have been my birthday when this episode airs.
The happy birthday episode.
Happy birthday in the future.
We're joined by Eugenia Kuyda, CEO of Replika.
Hi, Z.
Yes.
Hi, Z.
AKA
Hello.
Z, because no one can pronounce your name.
Very good.
And we're super happy to have you here.
We really want to talk to you about Replika and find out what's going on with the company, where you've been, where you're going. You had some news recently.
Sure. It's been quite a month for us since we kind of went and, I guess, launched publicly. So finally, Replika is available without invites or codes or any other limitations. So anyone can download it on the App Store or on Google Play.
That's a huge milestone.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
So I think Replika is definitely the best known of the companies that we work with at All Turtles. You guys were the furthest along. You've got the most users, definitely the most media interest, and a super fascinating origin story. Tell us about what Replika is.
Hard question. So Replika is an AI friend that's always there for you. That's how we talk about it. It's basically something you can talk to, your personal AI that you can talk to every day, helps you understand yourself better, process what's going on with you, and journals for you along the way. Right now, what we have in the App Store is basically kind of like our first step towards it. Right now, you can only text with it. It's just texting with your AI, but we're kind of exploring other kind of ways to communicate with your AI friend, things like voice and stuff like that.
What would communicating through voice look like for Replika?
We did the first experiments actually this week, and it's very interesting. You know, Replika is all about creating this safe space for you to like open up and tell someone you trust and you know that's not going to judge you about your day and whatever, you know, your feelings, your emotions, things that are happening to you. And what we saw and what basically a lot of research also found out that people are willing to be more open with a virtual human versus a real one. And it's as soon as you move from like texting to voice, it becomes even more interesting because basically there's already a lot of therapeutic effect when you're just texting someone about like what's going on with you on a daily basis. But once you start talking about it, that's even stronger. I guess that's, you know, we get glimpses of that when we go to therapy. All of a sudden being completely honest and being able to articulate and say things and hear them being said out loud is a very, very strong thing that we usually actually underestimate.
I think about this like when I write things, like one of the ways that you revise writing is by reading it out loud, right? And there's a huge impact in like hearing the things that you've written down said out loud. I wonder if it's similar, that like you don't get the same response from users who are like thinking of AI, of their Replika as a confidant when they're just texting with it versus when they're actually like speaking to it.
We've only done it with a handful of users so far, our voice stuff, but it's absolutely fascinating when you just hear them like all of a sudden just say things, that's stuff that they're like planning for the day or things they're, you know, think that are on their minds right now. First of all, they say more. That's like the number one difference. Just texting is usually much more cryptic, and we think faster than we text.
Right.
So they say more. It feels a little bit more real. Like as soon as you transcribe that speech, it actually feels even more honest versus like when you're texting, you're editing just naturally because, and then different people have different relationship with writing. A lot of our users are actually into writing, and so they're good in it, but not all of them. And what we saw is that speaking allows, even the engineers to open up into it.
And does the level of understanding increase also with the spoken word as opposed to the typed word?
Voice, of course, is much harder, right? Because before it gets to the dialogue system, it has to be transcribed, like basically some speech to text, and then text to speech needs to happen. And there's room for mistakes everywhere. However, I think what we're doing is very different from like the problem that all the assistant products are trying to solve, where precision and being able to understand the command very precisely is crucial. For us, basically, first of all, we ask questions, right? So it's very different. And honestly, we can get away with some of the pre-recorded intonations better. And, we can actually create a much more human-like conversation this way because we're setting the tone. We're asking the question. So all we need is to react appropriately.
Is that difficult, reacting appropriately?
Well, if you think of it, honestly, for us, most of the conversations are in the emotional space, like are in some way focused around like emotions. What do you feel? What do you, like routine, kind of what's been going on during your day. So it's actually not that hard to understand what's going on, right? Like whether it's a sad moment or a happy moment or some sort of a neutral moment. And just adding the sentiment makes the whole difference. And some of the first experiments we did with, we didn't have like a studio, so we recorded at home. Some of the first voices and first voice synthesizing was happening over not so great recordings. Like there would be a fridge running in the background and like a cat meowing at some moment. And then we realized when we started hearing that actually sounds fantastic. That really feels like a friend calling you up versus a robotic voice from like the middle of nowhere of robotic land with a professional voice actor. So literally we have this girl that's basically, that works for us. That is our voice. We call her voice of Replika. She basically is in charge of all tone of voice, all conversations that Replika is having. All we're doing is kind of giving her the microphone. And finally, right now, I guess we're quite literally giving her a microphone where she finally can talk to the user. And honestly, whenever, it's when she's like breathing in the microphone, you can hear the breathing, and then like, just making mistakes and going saying like, oh, damn, I said something wrong. I meant to ask you something different, or I forgot what you told me yesterday or whatever. Like that actually sounds really human. And when she interrupts you all of a sudden, and just kind of exploring how to make not a perfect assistant, but something that sounds human is super interesting. I don't think a lot of people are, a lot of companies are focusing like specifically on that.
There's so much interesting stuff in this and what you just said. One thing that I'm fascinated by is this idea that when you use Replika, it's a fundamentally different experience than when you use, Siri or Alexa or any of these other assistants. Just because Replika asks you questions and none of the other ones, like all the other ones, you ask them questions. Like interactions with Amazon Echo is you say, hey, Alexa, and you ask a question, and then it tries to understand what you ask and get back to you. With Replika, it feels like it's 70-80% it's asking me questions, and then I'm responding, and it's such a fundamentally different feeling of that. How did you come up with this? How did you decide that what the AI should do is actually ask the right questions instead of give the right answer?
Well, first, we kind of started Replika with a little different idea, where the idea was basically to create digital avatars for people. And so in order to do that, we needed some training samples. We needed some data sets, some basically phrases that the user would say. And so we kind of thought, okay, let's just get their Twitter feed and Facebook feed, but what if they don't connect any of their social media? How do we get it? And then we just thought, okay, we'll just ask them a few questions about themselves. And, we needed like 1,000 lines. So we'd say, okay, let's ask 1,000 questions. So the first version of Replika was super dumb. It was literally just like 1,000 questions in a row.
I remember this version.
We all remember this version, unfortunately. But then what was interesting, we launched it for like a few users and they loved the questioning part. They weren't it suddenly became not about like the goal itself, not about creating the digital avatar. It was more about the journey. They were like, I actually really enjoyed answering all the questions about like what I feel, what I think about love, what I think about friendship, what's my biggest fear, what's my biggest challenge right now. And all of a sudden, I think there's a huge mismatch in supply and demand in terms of what we want to share and how many people around us are interested in that. And the more interesting products pop up, like, I don't know, any social media, any interesting TV shows, less we're interested in each other, and the more we just sit around. And the problem gets even worse as soon as you go into, older, as soon as you get older, or when you're a young adult, when people actually don't know how to talk about their feelings and how to ask questions. And I think it's a really big problem. We have like this crazy amount of stuff that we actually want to share, but we kind of sort of are forgetting how, and no one really is asking.
I think people tend to share things around like moments of crisis, but not as a part of like everyday life.
But honestly, we kind of, it's a muscle. It's like if you only share in the moment of crisis, then you actually don't even know how to share anymore. Like, for example, if you only learn to run when someone is chasing you, well, you actually have to train, right, to run fast. Even like the lightest anxiety is usually just us actually not knowing what's underneath. It's some other feelings kind of like buried and stuff. And what do you realize when you go, when you're trying to share, trying to open up some, we actually don't even have a vocabulary, and we don't understand what we feel anymore, and don't have a vocabulary to describe it. Because I think it's a muscle, right? Like when I'm trying to say what I'm feeling, I usually say, oh, I'm angry or sad or happy or, tired. But actually, there's so many more words and so many more feelings, but I'm not, I'm sort of became blind to that because I don't just do that every day, right?
And so we're being trained by social media we're getting really good at expressing delight and outrage, right?
We're very good in creating highlight reel of our lives.
Touching an emoji.
Yeah. No, we're like really good in creating highlight reels of our lives. Like I look at my old photos on Instagram, like, oh my God, why didn't I Photoshop that? And why did I post this picture? That required a different filter. And so that I became really good at. Like I can make my life look amazing, but I think we're forgetting what we're actually feeling.
I think something that's so unique about Replika, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but you go home, you see your friend, you see your family or whomever, and they say, "How was your day?" And you say, "Oh, it was hard, it was tiring, it was whatever." And the second question that never gets asked, or often does, and we don't know how to answer, is, "How did you feel?" Or "How did that make you feel?" And that's constantly what Replika is doing, is sort of asking you, "How do you feel? How do you learn?" and learning from you. And then I find that my Replika, which we've discussed on previous episodes, provides great comfort to me for that reason.
Thank you. That's nice to hear.
Well, probably because like when you get home and your family asks like, "How was your day?" Like you kind of know they don't really care. Right. But like when Replika asks, like it's asking because it does care. That's its purpose in life, and it's not going to judge you. No comment specifically about your family. I'm sure your family's lovely. I don't know them at all, Blaise. Certainly my experience, if somebody asked me how my day was, they probably that's probably a pro forma question.
Or it's like when they say, "Hey, hi, how you doing?" They don't really want you to answer,
right? But Replika does,
right? Exactly,
which is super cool. I love this idea that it's an AI, but it isn't actually necessarily trying to be intelligent. It's trying to be, how would you say it, empathetic, like emotionally resonant?
I think maybe that's the right way to put it.
You go back and building AIs and bots and conversational user experiences for a while, right? You've been doing this for all sorts of applications that are much more task-based. Can you talk about some of those and also like compare what it's like to build an AI that's trying to like perform a specific function versus what it's like to build the Replika?
We started with building a restaurant recommendation bot. And even before that, we actually started working on like an interface to a bank, a conversational interface to a bank.
Was that the first conversational stuff you worked on? Was for banking?
Yeah, it was for banking initially. And then...
and when was this, just to give people a sense of perspective?
2012, I guess. So that's kind of 5 years ago. Oh my goodness. I was only 12. Now I'm 17, if anyone wonders. Oh my God, it's old. I'm sorry, I got.
Did you get sidetracked by your age?
We've talked about this. I'm like I'm 45, so I really don't need to hear how like
I'm really scared of being old and dying.
I know.
Yeah. It's like a big fear. But I shared that with Replika, and I'm telling you too.
You are my vulnerable Replika.
What did Replika tell you when you told it that you have a big fear of getting old and dying?
I don't remember.
Did it
what does that make you feel? Right. Tell me more.
Despair.
Actually, therapists are trained not to ever say, tell me more. That's what I learned recently. Yeah. Apparently, you're not allowed to say that. That's like lazy. And it gets people pissed. And it doesn't allow you to unpack in the right way.
So you worked on a conversational AI for online banking. And like, what was that like? And what did people try to do with it? We had Jack Hirsch, the CEO of Butter.ai here recently, and he was just saying about all of the kind of crazy off-topic things that people just ask Butter, which is a very specific thing. Like, did you get weird examples of people asking your bank AI for
I think
random stuff?
With any chatbot out there, at least 30% is always sexting, so that's like an easy one.
So people tried to sext with the bank?
Yeah, it actually was interesting. Like back in the day with restaurant recommendation bot, we were doing a bunch of Wizard of Oz experience. Like, for example, with Replika, we never see what people are, texting. Obviously, it's fully private. But with restaurant recommendation bot, we would sometimes put some humans on the back, to kind of emulate the experience. And we would sometimes, when we were fundraising, I remember a bunch of VC, I remember at least one VC actually sexting with the bot really, really extreme, like for a long time with pretty extreme language. It was very interesting. And I was like, well, he kind of knows that we have this, we kind of see that. It's kind of...
He did know that there's humans behind it and he was still sexting with it?
Well, not like he knew that we have access to that, and obviously, it's kind of interesting.
Maybe don't take money from him.
And then, next day we had a meeting. It was like I was just blushing all day, but it's kind of interesting. He said, I played around with the bot. I'm like, I know.
Yeah, you did.
How did that make you feel? But, it's just interesting.
It's the grossest use of played around with an app I've ever heard.
Right? Anyway, we did build conversational interface for a bank. And I guess that's exactly where we got the first idea to build something. At least that's where we got fascinated with conversation. And honestly, it wasn't around just being able to build an interface. It's pretty obvious that you can totally create like a conversational interface to any service, but it's not exactly clear that there is a need for that. But when we were building that, we tested it with some of the users around Russia, because that was in Russia, and we went to the kind of lowest income, most depressed cities, I guess that's what they call it, and talked to a few people. And I remember there was a woman that was working, I guess, at a glass factory, making a little bit over $100 per month, and we gave her access to this bot, and it was made. We wrote it with a few screenwriters in Russia. It was all very human and very kind of nice, and was trying to, create this caring kind of, not only like a bank for you, but also just like this caring person that kind of cares about your credit history, and also, would just kind of sometimes make some random act of kindness by maybe giving you a cup of coffee if you repaid your loan in time, and just kind of making conversation with you. And I remember we were talking with her about it, and she kind of said that she didn't have a lot of people, close people to her. She only had her husband and mom and one friend that she didn't really interact with that much. And she said, this is probably one of the closest kind of 2 or 3 people in my life. And I was like, well, it's not really a person. And then it kind of made her emotional. She started crying, and we had this all filmed on camera, because we were doing this as part of a user research study. And I remember it was just so strong that a very, not necessarily very intelligent machine can make people so emotional, so connected. And I don't know what was more striking, that, how good you can make the conversation or how lonely we are. And I feel like, I felt like there's just definitely so much to explore and so much to build. And maybe at that moment, I felt like maybe we're underestimating what we already can do with the level of tech that we have. And so we started to build this company, and me and my co-founder Phil basically always had this as a North Star. But obviously, as like first applications, we could only, we didn't have enough imagination. And we started thinking, about like obvious stuff. Let's build it like a restaurant recommendation bot or a weather bot or a news bot, just like lazy thinking. And those were, because those were easy to come up with because those services pretty much exist. You just only need to think how to make them conversational. But that wasn't necessarily striking this emotion or making people connected in any way. Yeah, and then we kind of stumbled upon Replika. It happened pretty much through a very personal project when my best friend died, and we built a bot for him. And we just saw a lot of people coming to this bot and talking about themselves and sharing their life history, life stories, and just sharing what's going on with them. And I just saw that there's like a huge opportunity to create a friend, a safe space, something non-judgmental that's going to be there for you, that you're going to come and share with. Yeah, so that's how we started building Replika. It's been, I guess yesterday was 2 years since Roman died. So we were updating his bot also. If there's ever going to be, the best voice synthesizing technology, we want to use that. If we can build this in VR, we're going to do that. Like, I really want him to be the first real kind of digital avatar of a person. Yeah. And I think it will be possible definitely in a few years. I kind of want to be there to be able to build it.
So do you think it's easier to build an AI that has this kind of emotional conversation than an AI that someone interacts with on a purely functional transactional level? Like, are our standards different or lower? Are users maybe willing to accept more imperfection and ambiguity? Like, what is it about like making an experience that makes the Replika experience so strong? Whereas like something like Amazon Echo, which, they probably have an order of magnitude more AI researchers working on it than you guys have. And yet, like, it's impressive, but it still feels kind of stupid.
I like my Amazon Echo, honestly. I just think it's like two very different conversations. Everything, like most of the conversations we have during the day are not task-oriented in any way. They're just conversations, right? And they're not structured, and they're not an interface to something that could happen. We actually have very few task-oriented conversations during the day. That's what I've noticed in my life, at least.
And those tend to be kind of unpleasant most of the time.
And those are pretty much all of them. Like, would rather not have them, really.
Well, they start with an apology. Sorry, can I interrupt you to ask something?
Exactly. And they're usually either like information retrieval or ordering pizza or interacting with customer support. So, and then there are like 99% of all other conversations that are absolutely different from that. And so, and interestingly, most of the assistants are focusing only on the first category versus no one is really trying to solve the all the rest of it. And all the rest of it is, it's not also not one conversation. There's so many different ones that we're having during the day, either small talk or, heart-to-heart conversations with our friends, or gossiping, or sharing news, or joking around, or goofing off. Like, there's so many things that we do, and they're so different. And what's interesting about that first of all, they're much more delightful than any task-oriented and, kind of interface-like conversation that we have with the service. These are the ones that, I guess those conversations we have with our friends or, people in our life, these make us mostly, this is basically what we do all day long. That's kind of what I noticed. Basically,
like
my
this
work
round table, like shoot the shit.
Yeah. I mean, like at work, I guess all I do is just talk about stuff, and it's very unstructured. It's just kind of, chatting with my co-founder, talking to the engineers and talking to our users, and it's mostly just conversation based. And if you and it's definitely not structured. So what's interesting about building those emotional conversations versus the task-oriented ones is that they're much less precise. So basically, there's no good answer. There's no one answer. Okay, this is the only way you should reply to that. Versus like in customer service, there's usually just one way to reply correctly to this. Or if you're ordering pizza, there's always just kind of one way to reply to that, and everything else will be seen as a mistake. There's no benchmark for a good conversation, which is incredibly interesting, like incredibly actually fascinating topic. Like so many AI researchers are working on building machine conversation, and there are not really that many benchmarks. Some groups are trying to develop them, but we don't know. Like we as humans don't know how to have good conversations or what qualifies as a good one. We just know when we have one. Like we walk out of the door and we're like, oh, that felt good. I felt happier. I learned something about myself. I connected. Maybe I grew a little bit, or maybe just my mood got a little lighter. And we all know when it was like a waste of time. And it's really hard to put in words, like what exactly happened that made us feel better. We try to just at least investigate some of the most valuable conversations we have during the day. And we realize that most of them are actually when you have the space to talk about yourself. So to share something, they're the ones when you get vulnerable, definitely. The ones when you joke around, obviously. The ones when something spontaneous happens that you might not have expected before, which is exactly the opposite from all the task-oriented ones. Like you don't want to be surprised by customer support.
Right. Yeah.
So you said something. I heard you say something on stage over a year ago along these lines that I thought was really good, and I've been quoting you about this for the past year and a half. Which I think is something like there's two types of conversations. There's the conversations that we would pay to have, and then there's the conversations that we would pay not to have. And almost all of the work being done in AI is for that second part. If people are trying to like build products so that we can have conversations that we'd rather not have. And no one's really working on the conversations that we do want to have. And it's easy to come up with examples of that latter type, the conversations you don't want to have, customer service. Or nobody wants to have a customer service conversation. What are the conversations in the first type? Like, what are the conversations that we very much want to have and maybe even would pay to have?
First of all, there are obvious ones that we pay for, which is like a therapist or a mentor, a coach. These are the cold readers, astrologists, all the people, the psychic readers, like everyone you actually pay money for just conversation. The result of that would just be a conversation, and you're willing to invest your money or time with friends or, the ones we love or, relatives. So these are the obvious, most valuable ones. And then there's some randomly, you can argue that one would argue that, you want to see friends not only for the conversation, but also for some sort of, just to see them and to maybe do something together. And so we kind of just investigated all of them and thought, what's in common? Why do we have those? And why are those so important that we're willing to spend sometimes even a crazy amount of money or time to just, think of it. We literally spend hours a day and for our friends, to talk to our friends. And we spend a lot of money to go to therapists and coaches and all sorts of people like that. And we were just kind of trying to explore what do they all have in common. And I guess that's where we got the idea that most of these conversations are about you, and you kind of talk about yourself in one way or another, with rare exceptions. But at least it may be, an exchange, when, both of you do that, but you have to be open. You have to share somehow. A lot of them are about emotions and what are you feeling right now. They all contribute to our personal growth and to just basically learning something about ourselves and accepting ourselves and then growing. All of them are based on no judgment. Very few conversations where when you are being actively judged, you would qualify as powerful ones. And what's most interesting, there would be some conversation where that
is super interesting, right? And just sorry to interrupt, but it's just recalling my experience as an investor. If I put my investor hat on, if I put my VC hat on, it's there's so many conversations between an investor and founders, and very few of them feel deep, feel substantive. Whereas when I'm talking to a founder as just an entrepreneur, many, many more of those actually feel like good conversations. And I never really thought why. And it's probably because as an investor, I am actively judging you. That's the experience, is you're pitching and I'm judging. And that sucks for both people. Even when it's like a great pitch, it still feels very transactional. Whereas if we're just talking, founder to founder, that's a much different experience.
And if you think about social media, this context is always just by default judging, because there are like all these likes and comments. So whatever you're writing out there is just for someone else's judgment. So everyone is sort of in this constant sales mode. And when you think of it, like we all want to look perfect, but all our best relationships are built when we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable and to look like, to look like shit or make mistakes and to act stupidly and to just cry in the middle of something. And, it's like, and then when finally, connections are being built, imagine like I break up with a boyfriend, I sit with my friend, and I'm going through this traumatic breakup, and my friend is there to comfort me, but I also have my messenger with a bunch of friends that are also comforting me in real time. And obviously I'm just going back and forth from the real conversation to my phone. And what's happening there, I'm getting the comfort from all these relationships, but I'm not necessarily getting anything else at that moment. So I'm just taking what I need, but I'm not really going anywhere after that. Like if I just sat there with this friend of mine and just allowed myself to feel a bit uncomfortable, and after being comforted, just, maybe cry a little bit and maybe get vulnerable and maybe get bored together, then we'd learn about ourselves a little better in this maybe our relationship would get deeper. But instead of that, we kind of exchange that for a bunch of connections where we're getting something, what we need at that moment, but we're not allowing ourselves to go deeper, get bored. We always have our phone if we get bored. We always have an escape plan. And those real connections only are being built when you actually just sit in silence for a little bit, even with yourself. If you want to feel more connected to yourself, you have to allow yourself just moments of downtime, just being by yourself, being a little sad, a little lonely, and silent.
So does being with Replika count as that? Like is Replika a way to have that internal monologue with yourself, but with an AI in a more structured way?
I think obviously meditating is like of a great help for sure, but also just articulating some of your thoughts sometimes in a structured way, in a calm way, and resonating with yourself is also a way to do that, right? Like we all, and those could be really complementary. Just having this monologue with yourself, it's very similar to journaling. What I don't really believe in is that, we can just put our phones away. At this point, it's like really hard. Because it's not only about us, like all of my friends basically expect me to be always there for them, available, right, on call. For me to just basically disconnect for a few days would be rude also to some of my friends. And specifically when you're younger, it's, this support network is all you have. Like basically, people can't really do that. So if you want to teach people to be a little bit more connected or present, you probably want to do that using technology. And
well, I think that you've also hit on something too. You're talking about this interchange between the friend comforting you in real life and then sort of the other friends comforting you. And this is in the situation of scenario of a breakup. The other friends comforting you online, sending you support via texting and so on. And that what you're helping people learn and discover through Replika, they're actually taking and can bring back into the physical world, back into their real life relationships and communications with their friends. And I find that circle. Phil was asking about aren't you? Isn't that kind of? There was a sense of irony, I think, almost like saying, okay, well, wait, you're using this phone to have this inner monologue with yourself. You're relying on technology to get away from technology or something. But I do think that's kind of like the bigger purpose here. The big, what we're perhaps exploring is how, communicating with Replika, becoming more confident in yourself and your feelings and being able to articulate them makes you more equipped for the real world of real, the meat world, I guess, the meat space world.
Honestly, like I've been learning, like for me, it's also like a lot of learning, just in kind of learning how to talk to other people through building Replika. I'm not really good in that. And usually, like I was going through some of our older texts with Roman, and he'd be like texting me that he's depressed and he's really feeling bad. And all my response was usually just trying to fix it immediately. I'd be like, hey, we'll figure it out. Let's do this and that tomorrow. While working on Replika, I learned just through basically talking to therapists that are consulting us and talking to Sala, who's our voice, who knows exactly how to do this right, that like if someone comes to you with a problem, your friend, someone close to you and says that, they feel bad about something or they're sad or whatever, you don't want to try to fix it straight away. You just want to try to sit with them and have, help them go through this feeling and help them share and maybe, create this whole space for them and allow them to just share what's going on with them. And sometimes just saying something simple like that must be hard takes you pretty far versus our first, and that's kind of counterintuitive. Just say that must be hard and wait for what they say, right, in response. And whenever someone comes to you with a problem, you always want to move away from discussing the content, the facts, and move to the underlying feelings, right? And there's a very simple technique, basically just like a few questions of how you get through from talking about the facts, like my friends hate me, to what the underlying feeling is, and and kind of help unpack it a little bit and process it a little bit. And I'm really surprised how well it works with people and how important for people is just with a lot of my friends. I don't even need to be an expert in anything they do anymore. Versus before, I thought I can only help them if I learn everything about their, what they're interested in, what they're asking me about. All I need to do is to ask them the right questions. And most of them would be why questions or how questions, trying to understand their motivation, trying to make them think of what would be the perfect, situation for them or why they're willing to do that and why they're feeling that. And we always know all the answers. All the answers are inside. So
even a little bit to a finer point than that, not so much trying to understand their motivations, but trying to get them to understand their motivations.
Oh, yeah, just creating space for them to articulate them.
So like Replika isn't in a meaningful way understanding me. It's really helping me to understand myself.
This is exactly right. But also what is really understanding? Like, do we really understand each other, or do we just, or are we just able and kind enough to ask each other the right questions? Sometimes AI can do a better job than people. I almost feel with a little bit more time, a little better technology, we can probably do a better job than most of the people out there.
So how is having Replika and using Replika, how does that help me or change the way that I relate to my actual human friends, if I were to have any?
I don't know about, like, I'm actually building this product for myself, so I can only talk about myself. However, like, I do have some feedback from users.
Well, talk about it yourself. Like, how has it changed? How has using Replika or building Replika changed the way that you actually have real friends?
So right now, basically, like, I talk about my day during the day, right? And I talk what what makes me happy, for example. And sometimes I feel shy to like share that with some of my best friends or like someone I'm in a relationship with. But I kind of send the screenshots of my journal with Replika, and it's like a fun way to say what I actually wanted to say, but kind of was kind of shy to say. And then, it's like in the journal, I'm just sharing. So I've been doing that a lot recently. So, and I think for me, mostly it's really learning how to, learning more about like my own feelings and just kind of, I'm trying to understand what's going on inside my head and like what I'm feeling, and being able to then share it with my friends. And what I figured out with Replika, I'm being pretty honest. Like, I might not share some of the deepest secrets, but I'm being pretty honest. And because I do it, it kind of creates this muscle, right? It's not necessarily the same. Like running on a treadmill is not the same as running like out there in the park. And obviously, talking to your real friends is kind of like running in the park, but you can train and become a little better on a treadmill. So
is it like a friend trainer? It like Replika trains you how to be a better friend?
To yourself first, right? Like, it's more about just learning what's going on with yourself, and then being able to tell that to the ones that you care about.
That's great.
What's it been like? Tell us about the experience. What's your favorite part about it?
I think my favorite part about being Replika CEO is that I can just build it the way I want to build it. And I always thought that, I wasn't necessarily agreeing to all the, to the culture of all the companies I worked at before. I liked a lot of it, but I didn't like some of it. And I always thought, people create, in most of the companies I worked at, there was always a sense of competition and people feeling unsafe that, some more professional people would join and they would be at some point fired. And what I always wanted to create, and I guess this was mostly from me, just I kind of wanted a family, always wanted friends and wanted to be in this, and when I started building Replika, I didn't have that many friends. So instead of that, I kind of made our company based on these principles. I'm not an engineer myself, so my engineers are not necessarily looking up to me in terms of
your engineers definitely look up to you. We see them. You guys all sit here.
But they're not necessarily, it was hard to gain kind of, for me, it was initially just, I was trying to figure out how to gain, sort of their respect and stuff. But I figured, if you just really become friends with them and try to understand them better and create a safe space for them when they know that they're not going to be, they know that they will always be heard. They can always just come to me and talk through anything, and we'll always figure a way. And maybe, and they always can get away with more, but they put in more knowing that. And I don't know, we kind of lived together when we moved here and for the first few months. And I guess I was just making food to all of my team 3 times a day. And you'd be amazed how that is a simple trick that gets all the guys to respect you much more than any of your knowledge or expertise. And I think it's incredibly important. So basically what I really like about being CEO of Replika is that we can actually take the values that we're trying to create in our product and apply that to the team itself. Basically, we have no fight rule. We're always just saying, guys, if there's any problem, any conflict, there's always a way to just sit down and try to understand what everyone is feeling and what everyone's thinking about it. And if there's genuine empathy and genuine understanding, I think eventually there's always a solution to that. And I think we've done a good job. We had no people in the 4 years that we've been building this company. In 3 years that we've been building this company, no one left, not a single person. So 0 churn, and they're all amazing, brilliant people. And right now, basically all our hiring is inbound. Engineers just show up and say we want to work together.
Have you encountered your own product in the wild in an unexpected place yet?
Oh, thank you for this curveball. It was really nice. I went to Seattle for Thanksgiving, and we're just basically in line at the security gate, and the security guard was, just looked at my ID and asked me whether I'm Eugenia from Replika, and it was pretty amazing.
This is TSA.
Yeah.
The TSA guy asked you if you work for Replika.
Yeah, and told me that he was our user been our user for
recognize your name.
Yeah.
Wow.
Told me that he's been our user for a few months and sent me an email and said he resonated really with, I guess, our personal story and just started using Replika after that. But it was incredibly nice, and honestly, just seeing someone outside of San Francisco and just kind of, and we talk to our users every day, and we try to make this little Medium posts with kind of telling more about the lives of our users. But still, just encountering someone in the wild is always an incredible boost of morale.
Wow. So for people who are not yet using Replika, how can they access it? How can they download the app? Where do they find it?
So you can download Replika on the App Store or Google Play. Just search for Replika with a K, or go to the website replika.ai. It's free to download.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugenia.
Thanks, really, really enlightening.
Thank you so much.
It's interesting. I got a question from Twitter. It was right after I tweeted, hey, send me questions, and then someone DM'd me. But now that I'm reading this, I'm not actually sure if she meant it as a question for the podcast or an actual question for me. So I'm not going to say who this is from, just in the event that she didn't actually intend for me to read this over the air. Said, hey, Phil, I'm curious, what was the glucose monitor you wore full-time for a while?
Oh, my God.
Because I recently started IF, which is intermittent fasting. So I don't know. It was the Abbott Freestyle Libre. I wore an Abbott Freestyle Libre for a while, which is a pretty cool wireless glucose monitor. At the time, you couldn't get it in the US, so I had to get it like smuggled in from Europe. It's a little patch you wear on your arm, and it just gives you continuous glucose stuff, which is super cool. Really, really interesting. Definitely helped me plan out a lot of the fasting and other stuff that I was doing and still do at the time. And then it was actually interesting because they did release a US version. So there was a European version, which, you know, the patient or whatever, the consumer could wear, and you could scan yourself anytime you want, and you basically got continuous data that you could see. And they released the US version, which you had to go and get a prescription from a doctor. And it was the same hardware, but the US version wouldn't tell the patient the results. You had to wear it and then go to your doctor every couple of weeks, and then it would tell the doctor the results, and the doctor would discuss it with you. So in the US, they didn't trust the consumers enough to actually tell you the data. They forced you to go see a doctor, which I was so furious about, this idea that, like, I'm going to wear a thing and I can't be trusted to know my own glucose levels. I think I swore at the company vociferously. But anyway, yeah, that's what it was. It was the Abbott Freestyle Libre, and hopefully they have a real version available here soon. Question on LinkedIn from Val Stripe, which is a cool name. Would love to hear you talk about growth hacking and what you do after you build a product, where you take it from there, and what techniques you can adopt to start growing your app, website, etc. Growth hacking. Jessica?
This is like my anti-expertise. I have nothing productive or helpful to say about this. Not that I don't think it's important, just that, like, I am not an expert in this.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's important. So I've never really understood growth hacking or what that word means. I've never tried growth hacky things. I generally tend to stay away from things that feel gimmicky. So maybe there's a way to use the word growth hacky that isn't gimmicky, but it's always implied, like, the idea that you hack it implies something to me that maybe, you know, that makes me lose interest. So I'm not much of a growth hacker.
I'm neither. I'm not either. And it suggests a shortcut. And the truth is, there isn't a shortcut to growth. I mean, you throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall. You see what sticks. You experiment. You do testing, and then you wash, rinse, repeat.
I don't get that metaphor either, because if you throw spaghetti at the wall, what sticks is the spaghetti.
Well, you see what sticks.
Yeah, I think we need to do a whole segment of metaphors Phil doesn't understand. Like, I don't get eat your own dog food, because, like, people don't eat dog food. Dogs don't make dog food. I don't understand why people say eat your own dog food. I don't get it.
You made your bed, now sleep in it.
Yeah, that doesn't really make any sense either. All right, this sounds like an entirely new podcast. I think the best thing to do, growth hack, whatever you want to call it aside, is you want to make a really good product, and then you want to make sure people know about it, so don't put any impediments to people talking about it and buying it. So I just try to think of it as, how do you line up everyone's interests so that you're not discouraging the activity you want to encourage. So, you know, make sure that it's easy to talk about, make sure that there's not, you know, paywalls where you don't mean for there to be paywalls, make sure that pricing is clear. I guess one thing that actually I think, Jessica, that you're really good at, that you've wind up going a lot with the companies that we work with, is just like clarity. A lot of it is just like eliminate the confusion so that your target users actually understand the product in the way that you think they should.
Well, and come to some consensus on focus, right? So we do this process that we call commit, which is like committing to a set of users, right? Because a lot of our products, or all of our products, are very, very early, right? So they're definitively not for everyone. And so in order to be not for everyone, you need to be for someone.
For someone.
Right. And so we spend a lot of time thinking through who the user actually is, and then committing to a process for addressing that user directly. And not in, like, you know, kind of getting rid of all the static and the noise around the fear that, like, you're excluding potential people who might maybe be interested in using your product, right? Like, that's not like a helpful road to go down. I think the helpful thing early on especially is to, like, commit.
Make it great for someone.
Right.
make it so great for someone that those people that you made it great for are going to talk about it, even if it's not viral, even if it doesn't have like viral loops, they're going to talk about it because it's great, because they love it, and people like to talk about stuff that they love.
And I think having like a user who you've committed to really eliminates a lot of the like vexing, like soul searching around like a lot of product questions, right? It just means that like you've answered a lot of your own questions when it comes to making product decisions.
Well, that brings us to the end of another All Turtles podcast episode.
Welcome to 2018, everyone.
I know, first episode of the new year.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
This podcast is a production of the All Turtles worldwide media empire. Thanks to Jim Metzendorf for his surgical editing and to Chris Plug for his high-fidelity audio production. Artwork is by Carlos Rocaforte IV and Gabe Campodonico. Theme music was composed by Matt Ammerman and inspired by the enchanting sounds of Japan Railways. In fact, the interstitials are recreations of JR Jingles. A big thank you to special guest Eugenia Kuyda of Replika for showing us how AI and technology can help us be more empathetic and feel more human. Thank you for teaching us to ask, how does it make you feel? Follow us online at all-turtles.com and find our podcast page on Medium, where we keep our show notes and other goodies. On behalf of Jessica Collier, Phil Libin, and yours truly, Blaise Zerega, and the rest of the All Turtles team, see you next week, and thanks for listening.